Okay, so good afternoon to everyone here in Argentina. Good morning to Sarah, way far away in New Zealand. Thank you so much for joining us. It's really a privilege for us to have this meeting with you. Just to give a quick introduction on today's meeting, I will say two brief things. And in first place, welcome everyone who is not a member of our organization yet. International Young Farmers is an organization founded last year in the middle of the quarantine, and with a vision of being able to join and meet other young farmers all over the world, and in that sense, being able especially to learn from other people's experiences, other young farmers' experiences. We've been having several meetings with people from New Zealand, Australia, the United States, Europe, and South Africa. We have had some high-level meetings even with the president of the World Farmers Organization, which was very interesting, and also high-level meetings with some local farmers here in Argentina that are very relevant in national and international level. So we've been learning a lot in the last year or maybe 2 years. So just to give a brief introduction to Sarah, well, she can introduce herself better, I'm sure, but she's a farmer. She I don't know if I'm saying this well, but she raises cattle in New Zealand and has traveled a lot all over the world, and she has some very nice, very interesting experience to share with us. So Sarah, if it's okay with you, I would like you to introduce yourself first and give us some background on what you've been doing, what you are doing actually right now in New Zealand, and what you've been doing the last couple of years as a farmer, as a young farmer. And then we will start with some questions and exchanging experiences, especially with trying to live our spirit of shared experiences and learning from each other. No, that is the whole point. No more and no less than this. So go ahead, and later we will start with maybe some questions.
Yeah, no, thank you very much for having me. I'm really excited about what you guys are doing, and wonder whether we might be able to do something similar in New Zealand. I think it's a really cool concept, and certainly something I'm personally very passionate about, connecting with young farmers and young people involved in the industry all over the world. So yeah, good on you all for getting it off the ground. Yeah, what an awesome idea. So yeah, my name's Sarah. I am sheep and beef farming in New Zealand with my family. And we've got a team of staff, so I'm not running the farm day to day, just involved sort of at a higher level and helping out when I can, because I'm also working off farm. But the farm is very much kind of at the core of all that we do, and real passion. It's reasonably big by New Zealand standards. It's 3,700 hectares. We've got 20,000 sheep and 1,000 cattle. So predominantly sheep, and it's sort of hill country. So not mountains like down in Patagonia, but also not big nice flats like you'll see the dairy farms and cropping land on. So it's very, very much hill country, and very much focused on growing grass, and farming to that grass curve, and utilizing rotational grazing, and kind of all those things New Zealand is pretty well known for. Also involved in quite a few things off farm. Sort of got involved when I was younger with New Zealand Young Farmers, which you've probably come across, similar organizations. It's sort of a social outlet for farmers and does a lot of competitions and skill building stuff. And so had about a decade involvement with them. Also spent time working for, and now I'm a farmer representative for Federated Farmers, our sort of New Zealand policy and advocacy organisation. So where we're taking policy positions to government and representing farmers' views. So I've had a lot of experience in that space, and I'm one of their local reps now. So I've come full circle there. Also been involved, and that was sort of through that I started to get involved with the World Farmers Organization, which sounds like you've talked to Theo, which is awesome. He's always a character. And where I met Augustina through the gymnasium program with the World Farmers Organization, which was an incredible experience I can talk more about later if you haven't already heard about it, but really cool opportunity to connect with young farmers from all over the world and share experiences. At the moment, alongside farming, I'm working for another one of our agricultural organizations called Beef and Lamb New Zealand, which is the levy organization. So all farmers pay into it, representing sheep and beef farmers. And my role is an extension manager. So we basically help take research to farmers and help them uptake new practices and find ways of improving their business and coping with regulatory change and environmental, new environmental requirements that are getting put on them, and meeting QA programs, and also we support them in all sorts of different things they need on their farm. And then I've also just taken on a role with a new organization that has been formed called the New Zealand Food and Fibre Youth Council. And so that is sort of a bit of a hybrid between young farmers and federated farmers, and the fact that it's trying to provide a stronger voice to youth in agriculture in New Zealand, into some of the policy discussions, and also doing a lot of work in the capability in terms of getting people into careers in agriculture and providing those pathways and stuff. So that organization's only been going for a couple months, but an exciting new opportunity that has a lot of potential. So sort of another exciting role. And yeah, so happy. That's a bit of an overview of many of the different hats I've got, and happy to talk about any one of them in a bit more detail, depending on what you guys are interested in. And I guess the only other bit, probably quite a big bit, is probably super relevant for you guys that I missed out, is up until the pandemic, I'd actually spent the previous 18 months traveling around the world. Partly I tied it in with stuff we were doing with gymnasium, and you basically took time off. Kiwis often will do what we call an OE and go and travel and live in other countries. And I sort of wanted to do something similar, but also wanted to use it as a learning opportunity to learn more about agriculture and farming systems in different parts of the world. And so spent time throughout Europe, Canada, the States, and in parts of South America, just trying to experience different things and meet different people and learn as much as I could. So that was really cool, and got cut a little bit short by the pandemic, but was really lucky to do what I did when I did. So yeah, that's a bit of an intro, but yeah, happy to talk about whatever is of interest to you guys.
I first of all, well, thank you again, and everyone here in this meeting. The idea is that all of you can participate and ask your questions if you want to. We just ask that you maybe request on the chat, so that we do this in an orderly fashion. You can open your cameras and your microphones and first introduce yourself, your name, maybe your age, and where are you from, what are you doing right now, and then ask your question. Sarah, let me go quickly to what you were just finishing up with, which was very interesting, this past 18 months, and amazing. What have you learned? I mean, I'm sure you learned so many things, but perhaps what did you come to appreciate about your life as a farmer and as a farmer in New Zealand, traveling through all those many countries?
Yeah, learned a lot. Very hard to pick one. A lot of it, the biggest thing I came home with was appreciation of how lucky we are with our climate and regulatory stability in New Zealand. That was certainly something I picked up from my time in Uruguay, particularly just the challenges, not being able to access some finance and, get loans, and just not having that kind of surety and being able to plan long-term when you're dealing with biological systems. That was something we kind of can take for granted in New Zealand. So it gave me a real appreciation of some of those, the challenges you guys have. And how lucky we are from that perspective. And I think the other, just the sheer variety of different farming systems, and kind of some of the concentration of the European systems and how that compares to what we're doing, and sort of consider normal here as very much not normal in the rest of the world, although very similar to South, much more similar to South America than to other parts of the world. And so I think it just really hammers that message home, that we can end up living in our little country's bubble and getting bogged down by things that annoy us. But when you actually look at that kind of wider global context, there's a lot of things we can take for granted that we shouldn't.
And just to follow up, and then I will go with Agustina that had a question. When you came to South America, did you come to Argentina? And in any case, what was your impression of farming in South America? What caught your attention, especially?
Your depth of natural resources is absolutely incredible. That was kind of the big, the quality of your soils and stuff. I was joking that if you guys were able to be in a position to have that long-term certainty and access to capital and stuff, that you would give us a real run for your money, because you've got a much better depth of natural resource and kind of that base level opportunity than we do. You've got way better soils and stuff. But I think the other thing that probably dawned on me, and I guess it's coming from such a small place, just the sheer variety of climates. The north of Argentina and the south of Argentina just couldn't be more different, and just the huge variety within that. Whereas we're just so different from here, and the fact that we're quite temperate, and the fact that, like a lot of the country, we can kind of grow grass more or less year round. It's obviously slows up in the winter and stuff, but very different, not dealing with those tropical heats and obviously the snow of Patagonia and things. And I guess the other one, which I kind of talked to, is just the huge scope. Like, there was just a huge variation from very kind of developed or at least parts of farm, very sort of developed, embracing lots of new technology, to, there's a big spread on that spectrum. And so it just highlighted just how much potential there was within the country. Yeah. Some ones.
Oh, well, again, thank you, Sarah, for your time. Probably you already answered my question, because made my question. But as you were traveling all around the world and in many countries, I want to ask you which were the similarities and difference between countries, probably especially between Argentina and New Zealand, in the same type of production. For example, in ships, or I don't know, in crops between United States, or I don't know, you were in Canada also?
Yeah.
And New Zealand, which were the similarities and difference between each country?
Yeah, so the most similar, the biggest similarity between Argentina and New Zealand I found, and I didn't get a particularly big sample size of Argentina, but Patagonia, when I was down in Patagonia and sort of down in the south, reminded me so much of being in the South Island of New Zealand. So I farm in the North Island, where we've got a couple mountains, but not really. But the mountains and the landscape, and we call it the high country in New Zealand, but very much merinos, basically grazing on tussock land, and very, very extensive, beautiful systems. And that reminded me that they just seem very, very similar. And there was a lot of similarities, both in terms of the landscape, but also in the farming systems, sort of between them. The cropping, we don't do a heap of, and I probably already said this, but South America and New Zealand probably had a lot more in common than, say, the States and New Zealand, or Europe and New Zealand. So probably less. I mean, there is, because there's very little, so like a lot of Europe is, because of the population concentration they have, there's a lot of like kind of, and the harshness of the climate, there's a lot of sort of indoor barn systems and stuff, which is, there's a couple of them in New Zealand, but it's very much the minority. Most things are, on most of our farmlands, hills, and, sheep and cattle running around grazing pasture. So a lot less of that. Ireland, very similar. So Ireland's probably an anomaly in Europe a little bit, from at least my snapshot of it. Very similar. Ireland dairy farms in particular are very similar to New Zealand dairy farms. There was a lot of dairy farms I went to that I could be in New Zealand right now. And some of that might have been the people and the network I had tapped into, but there was a lot of New Zealand grasses, New Zealand dairy cow genetics, New Zealand plant and milking sheds and that sort of thing. So that was probably the other kind of country that stood out as being very similar. And yeah, cropping, there's a bit of cropping down in the south of New Zealand, but we don't, compared to the rest of the world, so compared to what a lot of people are doing in Argentina, what they're doing in the States and Canada, we don't have anything like that scale, because we just don't have very much flat land. So that the huge huge areas of crop and big machinery and stuff isn't as much a feature in the same way. There's a lot more kind of specialty crops grown in New Zealand and crops grown for seed production and stuff, just because we don't have the area. They've gone for that sort of higher volume. So it's always fascinating and we also don't have a feedlot industry. Really, there's the odd one, but so it's not like you're producing feed to go into that, because it just doesn't economically make sense in New Zealand. So yeah, there are probably some there.
Sarah, and as a young farmer involved in policy, what do you think are the main issues young farmers, maybe not only in New Zealand, but many people all over the world, but what do you think us as young farmers will be our challenges and the most important difficulties that we will face growing up, becoming producers ourselves? I know, maybe owning a farm and being able to starting producing food and exporting, selling and exporting. What do you think our challenges will be in your experience?
There's certainly. So I mean, from a purely young perspective, I think the biggest challenge probably, and I think it's true the world over, is attracting people who aren't from agricultural backgrounds. So, might have grown up in cities and didn't sort of grow up on farms, getting them into the industry. And then I guess coupled with that is also, if you're wanting to get into land ownership and things, just that cost of entry, land, well, everything is just getting more and more expensive. And so there's a lot of concern that basically farms are getting so expensive that if you haven't been bought into a farm, like if you're not able to inherit or get a gift as part of it, that it's just about that people feel it's going to be impossible to get in. There's a lot of stuff going on about different equity partnerships, and the dairy industry has always had a very good model of share milking, where you can kind of build up equity through your career. So, but I think that's that whole getting a foothold in the industry and, you know, access to leases and stuff is a big challenge. And then I think there's some of the broader challenges that kind of affect everyone, not necessarily just young people, in terms of, you know, adapting to climate change, coping with more extreme weather events, less predictable seasons, all of that, you know, we feel the impacts of really heavily when you're relying on nature and getting rain at certain times of the year and stuff to run your businesses. So I think there's a lot of stuff in that space, and just, you know, regulatory changing consumer demands in general, that will and some of it creates opportunities for us, but I think it will take a lot of adaptation by us as young people in the industry. And I think it also, particularly from a New Zealand perspective, and possibly for you guys as well, you know, we are a trading nation. We rely on being able to export goods to the world. And if countries continue to look inward and try and become more protectionist, that becomes a real challenge for us in the future. And not necessarily. And if you look in, you know, climate as a wider it's a global context. Everyone needs to be doing their bit, and it doesn't actually. There's benefit from producing stuff in countries where it is the most efficient to produce it. So there's I think there's a lot of challenges in that space that will affect us as young people as we progress through our careers.
Tomas, do you want to ask a question?
Yes, hello Sarah, how are you? Well, I don't know if you said this, but in a few years I want to go there to New Zealand or Australia to live and work, and I want to know how's the farmer's life there, and also if you can give me some advices for me to improve myself for being a good farmer there.
Yeah. What is it? Any particular type of farming? So dairy,
dairy. I would like to be in a dairy farm.
And can you just say that again?
Dairy.
Oh, dairy. Yeah. So there's lots of opportunity in the dairy industry, because there are always not enough people very desperate for staff. So I guess just your basic, you can learn a lot on the job, but the more you kind of know about sort of general farm stuff, dealing with cows, you know, understanding pasture, being able to drive, you know, a bike or a tractor, all of those kind of basic farm skills, you know, being able to put up temporary fences, you know, shift electric wires, all those basic farm skills will hold you in really good stead. Obviously having milked previously will be an advantage, but just as easily, a lot of them will, depending on what sort of role you're going for, as long as you've got the right attitude and you're willing to learn, then like people generally are willing to give you a go and help get you upskilled. There's lots of, obviously the first step will be, hopefully our borders will reopen and we'll let people in. We're isolated from the rest of the world at the moment, but if you've got a few years, hopefully that'll that problem will be resolved. But then there's lots of websites where jobs like that will get advertised. So it shouldn't be too hard to kind of find one through those websites or word of mouth and that sort of thing. And then, yeah, I guess picking region there. Obviously Canterbury's a big dairy region, but also the Waikato. So I guess deciding what part of the country you want to be in, and that sort of thing as well. And then, yeah, obviously coming in for spring. So most people will be looking for people, well, about a month ago. So it's kind of winter, but a lot of people start calving in July. So they'll basically be wanting people from the start of that season. So in terms of, be there through calving and then, into the milking season. Hopefully that helps.
Sorry, regarding that point, dairy is, I believe dairy is very capital intensive and tech intensive industry. And here in Argentina, it's quite diverse. The level of digital and technological advancements. We have very high-tech dairy farms with milking robots and biodigesters and those sort of things. But many dairy farms don't have any of those. And you were just mentioning to Tomas that if you had milked before, it would be useful. So there I was wondering and raising a question regarding how an average dairy farm works there. What the day-to-day of a dairy farmer there would be like, and especially what sort of technologies are you relying upon? And do you have, connectivity and internet in these farms or not? Those sort of things.
Yeah, so huge spectrum. So there's some farms that have got robots milking their cows, and they can basically run their entire farm from their phones from anywhere in the world, through to very traditional ones that don't have much technology. Probably they've all got some because the companies are requiring more and more reporting and stuff. So there is a shift from sort of paper diaries into a bit more digital recording. But on average, there would be there's a lot of kind of like individual tracking of animals and animal performance and stuff that goes on. So when cows walk into the shed, their tags will get read, and you'll know what that cow's produced, every day for the season, and you'll notice if something's off. So there's a real range of different technologies that are applied. There's companies like virtual fencing is just starting to become sort of, I wouldn't say it's not widely used, but it's getting trialed on a more commercial scale in the dairy industry in particular, but it's got a lot of potential across. And so that's allowing people to do shifts without actually necessarily being there, and kind of controlling that feed intake. And then if people are feeding like supplement in shed while they're getting milked, that's all getting tailored to individual cows. But there's a huge, there's a big, and so there's animal health stuff that'll that'll alter by by individual animals and get tracked and stuff. And then obviously people with irrigation, most of that is very automated now. There's a lot of variable rate irrigation, so you're sensing how much water that bit of the paddock actually needs, and adjusting accordingly. The same's happening with nutrients and things. So so there is a real spectrum, and I guess the amount of technology a kind of entry-level farm worker is using relative to what a farm owner or manager is using can vary as well. but obviously stereotypically young people are obviously pushing technology uptake as well within businesses. And then like a lot of the kind of like health and safety and hours tracking and stuff is all getting automated through technology and stuff as well. But it very much depends farm by farm. And connectivity is getting better, but it's still not great in rural New Zealand. But there's lots of like innovative solutions that farmers are building their own like little radio linked satellite thing to make sure they can get coverage and communicate within their farms and stuff.
And regarding that point on animal healthcare and well-being, another pressing point for us, I believe, is sustainability, especially on the side of demand, no, and consumers.
Yep.
And do you see from the consumer's point of view more and more pressure as we are feeling towards farmer in traceability and being able to certify how they are doing things? And is the consumer, punishing with low prices or anything the farmers that are not equally responsible?
Yeah, definitely. It's huge, but I probably doesn't feel like it's necessarily new from a New Zealand perspective, because it's something we've been conscious of and responding to for a long time. So yes, I think we're seeing that real change in consumer expectations. But I guess as farmers in New Zealand, it's not necessarily, we're not having to necessarily change what we're doing to meet those expectations. It's just recognition of what we're already doing. But it's something we've taken, like both our companies and government and individual farmers have always taken it really seriously. And we've got a lot of, we call them quality assurance schemes, or QA schemes, where we do lots of audits, and each company that you're supplying to will have requirements for their customers, and we'll get audited against all of those standards. And that a few of them have just amalgamated, which is nice from our perspective, because it means we have to do less audits that are exactly the same. So, but like our farm's involved in at least 4 different sort of farm assurance or quality assurance programs for different customers, to make sure that we are meeting very very high standards. But it's I guess it's something as an industry in New Zealand we pride ourselves on. So anyway,
okay.
We've been rated as having some of the highest animal welfare standards in the world, sort of even before all of that. So it's not not too big deal, but it is very important with changing consumers.
Inés previously introduced herself, but maybe someone didn't heard that she's a PhD candidate studying carbon. And Inés, could you comment a bit on your study, and maybe to contrast with Sarah what she's seeing and what they are doing in their farms regarding carbon? I don't know, Sarah, if you're measuring carbon footprints and carbon emissions. And maybe with Inés, you can have a quick take on this issue and how she's seeing it here in Argentina. Inés, do you want to share some of your thoughts?
Yes, I work with the carbon sequestration, carbon cycle in dairy systems with cows, and it's so difficult, this team, because it's not a study, and the people think that the cows are a problem for the world, for the emission of carbons. And well, we are investigation for demystify this topic, because it's a big issue for all and for the world. and the industries produce more CO2 in the atmosphere than the coast. But it's so difficult that the people understand this point.
Do you see this kind of issue as well, Sarah?
Yeah, totally. Very, very similar challenge here. New Zealand's in a very unusual position for a developed country. The fact that 48, I think it's just under half, it's about 48% of our emissions come from agriculture, which isn't necessarily a unusual profile for non-developed nation, but for a developed nation, most of them have got a much higher concentration of kind of transport and energy emissions and stuff. But it's because we're an agricultural nation, we're an exporting nation that produces food. So it does, so we've got a very unique emissions profile amongst our peers, which creates huge challenges for us because, especially because the industry has done a huge amount since the 90s. So the subsidies got removed in New Zealand in the late 80s, and basically our entire economy and industry got transformed through that process. And since then, it's just the industry's been on a huge efficiency growth, and through that we basically halved our stock numbers while keeping our production more or less the same, which has obviously had big benefits for our emissions intensity per kilogram of product, which is a really positive story. But it also means a lot of the stuff other people and countries can do in an agricultural sense aren't available to us anymore. So that creates a challenge. But also the whole methane and nitrous oxide and carbon dioxide are very different gases, and we did have a good achievement in our last set of climate legislation, I think it was 2019, that we've actually got that recognized domestically, that that methane is a short-lived gas and nitrous oxide and carbon dioxide are long-lived gases, and they have different warming impacts on the climate. And so we've actually domestically got different targets that have to be achieved for methane reduction and for carbon dioxide and nitrous oxide reduction. So that at least acknowledges it. It's still the challenge we have as an industry is still it's still a very big challenge for us. But it's at least a step in terms of what you were talking about. And I guess you'll probably hear internationally or from nations such as both of ours talking about the GWP, the global warming potential metric. So obviously everything's done in GWP 100, and that doesn't necessarily acknowledge methane's different warming impact on the climate the way agricultural nations would like. And so there's a big push for more use of GWP star to reflect that. But that's a very complicated international conversation. But yeah, we hear a lot about that in New Zealand. And I guess the other thing that's quite unique, there's a few things that New Zealand's been doing, but we're currently, so we've been involved, you guys might have been involved. There's a something called the Global Research Alliance for Agricultural Greenhouse Gases that's been going since, I want to say, about 2008. But there's a lot of international collaboration on like climate science relating to agriculture. That's really exciting. And so yeah, New Zealand's been really involved in that, and there's study tours and stuff that go with that to help share that knowledge. And the other one that's quite interesting is we, as an industry in partnership with the government, are currently trying to develop a way of pricing emissions at the farm level rather than it just being a tax at the processor level. And so there's a big program of work at the moment, basically working through various scenarios and how that would work so that it can actually recognize if farmers are, that it can actually recognize good work farmers have done, and that it's not just a tax and the only solution to that is reducing stock numbers, but that it actually can recognize, efficiency improvement, or, reducing use of supplementary feed and better match to feed demand. If you can actually, if there's stuff you're doing, or feeding higher energy feeds, if there's stuff you can doing that are actually reducing your footprint at a farm level, you should be rewarded for that and not penalized just because you produce X number of X kilos of product. So yeah, it's a challenging but very kind of interesting project in terms of a potential blueprint for how emissions can be dealt with at a farm level going forward. I don't know if that.
But it's also not only a matter of emissions, but also sequestration. No, I mean, I think I've heard some things about the Global Research Alliance. It sure is interesting. Here in Argentina, we have quite a very, I don't know in numbers, but in research, a very important amount of research being done on this topic. Well, Inés is actually working on this right now, and maybe the world is, I perceive like in the world there's not a focus on this point of the sequestration. They only focus maybe on emissions, and perhaps if you want to reduce it a bit, but not at all on sequestration and how pastures can sequestrate and leave carbon on the soil. No, I don't know, Inés, if you're working on something like this.
No, this no numbers, but it's very important. The sequestration is a lot of sequestration, more than is association with trees, system with tree and cows and pastures, grassland, and sequestration is more than other systems like corns or agriculture.
Yeah. So there is a lot of focus. Sequestration's a little bit, it's not controversial, but there's a couple sides of the sequester argument in New Zealand. It is obviously, it's a really important part, and particularly for diversified hill country properties like ours, we have thousands, probably hundreds of thousands of trees sequestering carbon on the farm, and are encouraging that. And we plant thousands more every year for shade and shelter and erosion control, and obviously the benefit of sequestration. The other side, so very much it's recognized. We've had since, I want to say about 2008, again, might have that slightly wrong. We've had what's called an emissions trading scheme, where farmers have been able to sell blocks of a certain size, of a certain height, of a certain canopy cover, and get carbon credits for them through that scheme. In this farm level pricing scheme, we're hoping to recognize smaller blocks of trees and like shelter belts that don't meet that emissions trading definition, but are still very clearly sequestering carbon and providing a service. So getting recognition for that, so you can offset some of your farm's emissions against that, because then we can look at it as a balanced whole system. But the other challenge that we're seeing, why, although we're very pro sequestration and want it to get recognized, we're also getting a big challenge because of the price of carbon is getting so high. The economic return from just planting whole farms and pine trees to redeem carbon credits is actually out competing sheep and beef farmers' ability to buy the land and actually farm it if you can get a better return from carbon. So there's huge areas of New Zealand's farmland that are just getting blanket planted in pine trees for carbon, which isn't looking long. So it's taking jobs out of community, it's taking food production away, it's it's really challenging the fabric of communities. And then when you look long term, that land's never coming back into production. It's just going to stay in trees forever. So although trees are a solution to climate change, it's we also, sequestration can't be our only tool. We need to also be reducing those carbon emissions, because otherwise you just need to be, otherwise you're just going to run out of land to plant if that's the only option. So we think you need to do both. You need to be reducing particularly those long-lived gas emissions, because methane does stabilize as long as you're not increasing animal numbers after 20 years. Its warming impact is stable. So that's a very different conversation than every new kilogram of carbon dioxide that gets emitted is around for centuries. And the soil one in New Zealand is also very interesting. So obviously we're very pro soil carbon and soil organic matter, but New Zealand has got very young soils with very high levels of soil carbon. And the interesting challenge for us, the science is still very much catching up, but if we were to include it in an accounting scheme where you got paid for the benefit, because our soil carbon levels are really high, there's not that much upside. So it's not like we've got really low levels and heaps of ability to grow. So there's not a heap of upside. And then you get a drought, which we get quite regularly, particularly on the East Coast. And through no fault of your own or nothing you can control, you then lose a whole lot of soil carbon. And so if you were getting credit for what you were building up in other years, suddenly when you get a drought, when you're struggling financially anyway, because of the drought, you think you're going to get billed for the soil carbon you lost, which you didn't really have any control on. So we see so basically we're kind of at this stage until sort of science catches up. We're very much pro good management practice and doing everything you can to preserve that, but not necessarily trying to get paid for it. So yeah, just because there's as much downside, if not more, as there is kind of upside from that. And that's in hill country. And cropping situations where you've got quite a different setup. There's a different it can be a different calculation.
Okay, so well, we are closing up right now. Just I wanted to ask you one last question, and then if you can also leave like a final message maybe for young farmers as yourself. What have you learned? Inés, sorry, do you want to ask a question first?
Sorry, the last question. Are you manager extension now? Really?
Mm-hmm.
Are there capacitation for the youngs and producers or anything?
What was the beginning of that again?
If you make capacitations for the youngs, for the producers in New Zealand, maybe if you are extensionist.
Yeah, so we're doing
yes, talk.
So in around climate or in general? So
in any times, any topics, it's no only the climate.
Oh yeah, okay. Yeah, because we are doing a lot of stuff in the climate space to help farmers know their greenhouse gas emissions and then have a plan, understand what's influencing them, and having plans to manage them going forward. So there's a lot of stuff that, but yeah, we do have programs just for young people in terms of so we've got a program called Generation Next, which is kind of like upskilling kind of future farm managers and giving them kind of like base financial knowledge, farm system knowledge, supply chain knowledge, what impacts meat quality. It sort of goes through kind of all the aspect, well, not all of them because it's so complicated, but it kind of goes through key sort of key aspects and skills they want as young people. And then we also partner with a lot of organizations. So from a female perspective, there's an amazing organization called the Agri Women's Development Trust that we partner with, and they develop programs to upskill women in agriculture to kind of enable them to have a more powerful role in their businesses. And so they do everything from like governance training to like understanding your financial statements, understanding risks in your businesses. Yeah, they've got a whole range of amazing programs. And then we also partner with the Rural Leaders Foundation, which has it's one of it. You've probably heard of Nuffield International, which is a global. So Nuffield. So it's in about 20 countries, and basically they select scholars who go on basically a global study tour and connect with other farmers. So that's kind of their flagship program, and then they also have a domestic program called the Kellogg Rural Leaders Program, and that puts people, and that's a kind of a big capability program. You do a project and you just learn a whole lot of really important leadership skills. So there's that sort of thing there. So there's a lot of kind of different stuff that happens for young people. Is that kind of what you're looking for? Yeah. And then there's obviously formal production. This is how you farm. This is how you condition for a sheep or a cattle, or this is how you manage pastures or establishment. There's all that kind of stuff that's sort of generic for everyone that we do as well. Yeah.
So interesting.
The website, our website's got all the resources on it. If you want to have a look, doesn't necessarily talk about that capability stuff as well, but if you want to see what farming resources are given to farmers in New Zealand, or look at fact sheets or videos or podcasts or anything, have a look at the website. It's a fount of.
Can you write down on the chat the website, please?
Yep. Well, yeah.
Sarah, just to wrap up, 2 quick questions. If you could start over, I know you've been traveling all over the world and watching and seeing different forms of farming all over the world. So if you could start over, would you still choose to be a farmer, and would you still choose to be a farmer in New Zealand? No, and have you learned have you confirmed that this is your passion, and this is what you would do? And the second question would be, well, of course, the general advice that you have learned through these years and these experiences that you think it's important to share with other young farmers, in this case from Argentina.
Yeah. So yes, definitely agriculture is still my passion. And yeah, I feel very fortunate to be farming in New Zealand in a pretty forgiving climate. So definitely that's been reinforced. I just think agriculture is such an amazing industry full of passionate people that are so willing to help and share their knowledge. And I just think producing, I love the outdoors and being outside and being in nature, and we just get to live and farm in the most beautiful places. So totally, and then produce, healthy, nutritious, nutrient dense food for the world. So yeah, what's not to love about that? Even if it comes with some challenges. Yeah, I guess the best advice is keep doing what you're doing. Like, it's so cool to see what you're doing. There's so many interesting things happening around the world, and I think there's so much. I think we're all slightly different. There's real common challenges that we're all grappling with. And yes, our countries are all different and our farming systems are different, but there's so much commonality to what we're doing and learnings that can be shared. So I think there's so much value in what you're doing, reaching out to other countries and connecting and sharing that knowledge. So and it's so interesting, and there's just so many people willing to share and share their passion and share their mistakes and their learnings and stuff. So I'd say really excited about what you guys are doing, and yeah, keep doing it, and yeah, good luck.
Thank you so much, Sarah, for your time. This was a very unique experience and an honor that you can share with us this time. So thank you. Hope you're well, and maybe we can see each other again soon.
Yeah, no, thank you. And if you anyone's got questions, feel free to reach out. And once our borders open, if anyone is coming to New Zealand, get in touch and we can find some cool places for you to visit.
Sure.
Yeah.
Thank you so much. Bye,
Good-
everyone.
good
I'll
luck
see you
with
next time.
everything.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you
Bye.
so much.
Thank you. See you.
Bye bye.